If you are tuning in right now as the learner, someone who wants to understand the mechanics of the world.
Yeah, without drowning in all the noise.
Right, exactly. You are probably feeling completely overwhelmed today.
Right.
You open your phone and the geopolitical headlines are just a relentless wall of breaking alerts, each one sounding more catastrophic than the last. It is Thursday, March 5, 2026, and we are watching an incredibly steep escalation in the Middle East.
A massive military conflict unfolding in real time.
And alongside it, an unprecedented rhetorical and diplomatic response from Russia that really threatens to reshape global alliances.
And when events move at this velocity, the first casualty is usually context. The sheer volume of kinetic action on the ground kind of obscures the high-level diplomatic maneuvers happening behind closed doors.
You completely lose the thread of how we got here.
Exactly, and what the long-term endgame actually is.
Which is the exact gap we are going to fill today. Today's deep dive is drawn from a single, highly detailed source to keep us focused. We are analyzing a recently published dispatch from a geopolitics and economics collective that operates on Patreon.
They are known as KULT.
Right. They have compiled a really comprehensive breakdown of the statements, the military data, and the diplomatic posturing over the last week.
And the value of this specific analysis is how it captures the duality of the crisis. It maps the physical destruction of the military campaign right alongside the structural, institutional maneuvering happening at places like the United Nations.
So our mission for you today is to build that map. We are going to unpack the timeline of the past 6 days. We're going to look at the staggering logistical scale of the military strikes taking place.
And we are going to break down the intricate diplomatic chess game that Russia is currently playing in response.
Consider this your ultimate shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on this crisis. But before we get into the timeline, there is a fundamental baseline we need to establish regarding the nature of this material.
Yes. I want to deliver a very clear disclaimer to you, the listener, before we go a single step further. This deep dive covers highly charged, incredibly sensitive political and military events. We are discussing active, ongoing conflicts involving the United States, Israel, Iran, Russia, and several Gulf states. I need to emphasize that we are absolutely not taking any sides here. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the military actions, the strategic justifications, or the political statements contained in this content. Our sole goal today is to impartially report and unpack the ideas exactly as they are presented in the original source material.
Just helping you understand the competing narratives that are being laid out.
Nothing more and nothing less.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let us start by laying out the foundational facts from the dispatch to understand the catalyst. On February 2084, which, incredibly, was just 6 days ago, the United States and Israel launched a joint military offensive. The campaign is officially dubbed Operation Epic Fury.
The name itself really signals the intended posture, but the raw data coming out of U.S. Central Command regarding the execution of this campaign is what truly defines the scope.
The numbers are staggering.
They really are.
In less than a week, this joint offensive has executed over 2,000 precision strikes. I want you to pause and think about the sheer mechanical reality of that.
2,000 strikes in 6 days.
It breaks down to over 300 strikes every single day.
Yeah.
Think about a busy regional airport where a commercial flight takes off every few minutes around the clock. Now replace those commercial flights with bombers, fighter jets, and drones.
All requiring mid-air refueling, real-time satellite intelligence, complex targeting coordinates.
Exactly.
We are talking about kinetic military actions, meaning actual boots on the ground, missiles in the air, real physical destruction, rather than just, cyber attacks or economic sanctions.
Right.
Sustaining that level of kinetic output requires a logistical supply chain that very few nations on Earth possess. You are draining munitions, stockpiles, cycling flight crews, and operating at absolute maximum capacity.
And the analysis is very specific about where all that ordnance is going. Operation Epic Fury is targeting Iran's missile infrastructure, their naval assets, and their military command centers.
But out of all those 2,000 strikes, there is one specific event from the very first wave of attacks that sent an absolute shockwave across the globe.
During the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was assassinated.
What's fascinating here is the immediate tactical and geopolitical vacuum created by an action of that magnitude. You are targeting the absolute pinnacle of a nation's political and religious command structure. The supreme leader isn't just a president. It is an institution that binds the military, the government, and the religious authority together.
Wait, walk me through the strategic logic there. If you take out the absolute top leader on day one, Doesn't that just guarantee the most extreme, unmeasured retaliation possible? It feels like you are vaporizing the established rules of engagement before the ink is even dry on the operation order.
That is the ultimate gamble of a decapitation strike. The theory is that by removing the head, you paralyze the decision-making apparatus, creating infighting and delaying a coordinated response.
But the reality?
The reality is often exactly what you just described. You completely upend the board. By taking that shot in the opening hours, the architects of the operation essentially guaranteed that the response would be unprecedented. You force the adversary's hand because failing to respond to the assassination of a supreme leader would shatter the regime's internal legitimacy. It sets the stage for a massive regional retaliation.
And that retaliation was instantaneous. Iran didn't just fire back at incoming jets or localized military bases. They launched a massive wave of missile and drone strikes across the Gulf states. The dispatch specifically names the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia as targets of these retaliatory strikes.
Now, if you are listening to this from Ohio or London or Tokyo, you might be tempted to view that list of countries as a distant, localized problem.
Sure, sounds far away.
But think about what those specific nations represent. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain. They are the absolute epicenter of the global energy market. We are talking about the critical bottlenecks of the global economy, places like the Strait of Hormuz and massive refining complexes like Upquark.
Ground that in reality for the listener. How does a drone strike in the UAE or Saudi Arabia actually hit them in their daily life?
It is basic supply chain mathematics. If a swarm of drones damages a major Saudi refinery on a Tuesday, the global supply of crude oil immediately constricts.
And prices shoot up.
The price per barrel spikes due to panic and actual scarcity. By Friday, the cost to fuel the cargo ships crossing the Pacific goes up, the cost to fuel the diesel trucks delivering groceries to your local supermarket goes up, and within weeks, everything from the produce in your fridge to the plastics in your smartphone becomes more expensive. Hitting those specific Arab states instantly transforms a regional military conflict into a global economic crisis.
It is an economic crisis, but the dispatch forces us to look at the horrifying human tragedy at the center of this. The text solemnly highlights the devastating human toll this rapid escalation is taking on non-combatants. It specifically details an attack on a school in Iran that resulted in the deaths of more than 150 girls.
When you have thousands of precision strikes and retaliatory missile barrages flying across densely populated regions, the cost is inevitably tragically paid by civilians. This specific detail, the loss of over 150 young lives in a single location, is a stark reminder of the reality on the ground.
It really is.
It also serves as the immediate catalyst for the diplomatic maneuvering that follows. That level of civilian tragedy forces the human cost to the forefront of the international conversation, making it a lever that diplomats begin to pull.
So what does this all mean? We have a 6-day timeline that includes a historically massive military operation, the assassination of a head of state, retaliatory strikes targeting the arteries of the global economy, and heartbreaking civilian casualties. How do the global superpowers not directly involved in the shooting react to this level of chaos?
Well, the KULT analysis shifts our focus heavily toward Moscow to answer that.
The dispatch details Russia's incredibly pronounced escalation in response to Operation Epic Fury. We see this crystallized in statements made by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov at a roundtable with ambassadors in Moscow this past Thursday.
Yes.
Lavrov made a declaration that really jumped out of the text. He stated that Russia will do everything possible to create an atmosphere that makes U.S. and Israeli operations against Iran impossible.
We need to unpack the word impossible.
It's a strong word.
Very strong. In international diplomacy, language is usually highly calibrated and intentionally vague. You hear phrases like urge restraint, or express grave concern, or condemn the escalation. Declaring that you will make another superpower's ongoing military operation impossible is a severe line in the sand.
It is not a condemnation.
No, it is a vow of active obstruction.
But how do you actually enforce that? They aren't threatening to shoot down American planes, right? How does a country make a campaign of this scale impossible without starting World War III?
According to the text, Lavrov explicitly mentioned utilizing international frameworks. He is talking about weaponizing the United Nations. The strategy involves building a coalition of other countries within the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly to legally, diplomatically, and structurally paralyze the U.S. and Israeli campaign.
Oh, wow.
You use veto powers to block any legitimizing resolutions. You rally the Global South and the General Assembly to pass sweeping condemnations that isolate the actors economically and diplomatically. You engage in lawfare to turn the international community into an administrative wall.
Lavrov suddenly appointing himself the guardian of international sovereignty at the UN is certainly a plot twist considering recent history. But in the chess game of the Middle East, irony is usually the first casualty.
That's a good way to put it.
And the Russian diplomatic offensive didn't stop with Lavrov's roundtable. The dispatch cites a separate statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry, via Reuters, that introduces a very aggressive narrative. Russia is directly accusing the United States and Israel of deliberately provoking Iran's retaliatory attacks against the Arab countries.
They are advancing what we can call the foreign interests argument.
Yeah.
The Russian Foreign Ministry is claiming that the architects of Operation Epic Fury actually wanted Iran to strike the Gulf states.
Wait, what?
The narrative suggests that the U.S. and Israel are deliberately trying to drag the Gulf Arab states into a wider regional war to serve these undefined foreign interests.
Are they actually claiming the U.S. wanted its own allies' energy infrastructure bombed? That seems incredibly counterintuitive. Why would you want the global oil supply disrupted if you are trying to execute a precise military campaign?
It is about narrative positioning. Whether the claim is factually true is less important to Moscow than the diplomatic wedge it creates. By making this accusation, KULT notes that the Russian Foreign Ministry also made a point to express deep regret over the human and material losses in those Arab countries.
So they are playing the sympathetic friend.
Exactly. They are rhetorically aligning Russia with the Gulf states. They are positioning themselves as the only global power that recognizes and regrets the damage done to the Arab nations, while simultaneously framing the U.S. and Israel as the reckless architects of that damage. It is an attempt to fracture the historical alliances between Washington and the Gulf capitals.
It is a ruthless diplomatic chessboard. Let's look at the actual moves being made by the heads of state to back up this rhetoric. The source details how Russian President Vladimir Putin is directly intervening. Over the course of the week, Putin held direct phone calls with the leaders of 4 of those Arab Gulf states.
Look at the strategic value of those calls. The dispatch notes that Putin offered to use Moscow's ties with Tehran to convey concerns about the Iranian attacks on the region's oil infrastructure.
Right.
Putin is actively positioning Russia as an indispensable mediator. He is telling the Gulf states, Washington can't stop the missiles hitting your refineries, but we have a direct line to Tehran. We can protect your infrastructure.
That is a massive play for long-term influence.
Yeah.
They are offering to act as the primary diplomatic shield for global energy assets, and Putin isn't the only one working the phones.
Right.
Lavrov also held a call on Tuesday with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqi, as reported by AFP. During that call, Lavrov emphasized the critical need to ensure the safety of the civilian population and civilian infrastructure across all countries in the region.
Which brings the conversation right back to the tragic human toll we discussed earlier. Building on that call with Iraqi, Lavrov formally proposed a region-wide moratorium on attacks that cause civilian casualties. He specifically weaponized the moral weight of the school attack, citing the deaths of those girls as the prime example of why this moratorium is an absolute necessity.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Lavrov doesn't just stop at proposing a moratorium. He dives into the history of recent negotiations and introduces a highly controversial narrative about a trick.
Yes.
According to the analysis, Lavrov brought up previous diplomatic talks that took place between the U.S. and Iran in Geneva. Lavrov claims that those Geneva talks actually ended on a positive note. But then, he alleges, Washington abruptly pivoted and accused Tehran of being unwilling to comply with demands.
He characterizes that pivot by the U.S. as a deliberate deception.
He calls it a deliberate trick designed specifically to manufacture a justification for military action against Iran. He implies the U.S. went to Geneva just to check a diplomatic box before a pre-planned war. And he issued a stark warning to the international community, stating that blaming only Iran for the current situation would be complicity with Israel and the U.S. continuing to do what they're doing.
A trick. That is a massive accusation to level on the global stage. Is he actually suggesting that the entire diplomatic effort preceding this conflict was bad faith theater?
That is exactly the narrative he is spinning. He is trying to completely dismantle the legitimacy of Operation Epic Fury by attacking its origins.
This raises an important question, and it is a critique that Lavrov points out quite sharply in the source material. The dispatch notes Lavrov questioning the ultimate goals of this entire campaign. He stated that even American politicians have failed to articulate a clear end objective for Operation Epic Fury.
That critique really stood out to me. When you have an operation of this magnitude, how do you not have a publicly defined victory condition?
That is the danger of military campaigns that lack defined off-ramps. Think about the cascading variables here. You have thousands of daily strikes, you have multiple sovereign nations involved, you have devastated the global energy supply chain, and you have assassinated a supreme head of state.
Yeah, it's a powder keg.
If, as Lavrov claims, there is no clearly defined end objective articulated by the architects of the operation, then the risk of endless, self-sustaining escalation becomes a very real possibility. An operation without a defined conclusion doesn't just degrade an enemy, it perpetually destabilizes an entire hemisphere.
It is a dizzying amount of geopolitical movement to process, and KULT really captured the density of how the kinetic and the diplomatic are colliding. Let's briefly recap the map we've just built from this dispatch. We are looking at a conflict that is only 6 days old. In that tiny window, Operation Epic Fury has seen over 2,000 precision strikes. We saw the assassination of Iran's supreme leader in the opening wave, vaporizing the old rules of engagement. We saw the immediate, heavy regional retaliation by Iran against the Gulf states, threatening the global economy's energy hubs.
We covered the devastating civilian toll, including the loss of over 150 girls in a single school strike.
And we unpacked Russia's aggressive diplomatic offensive, Lavrov vowing to use the UN to make further operations impossible, and Putin stepping in to offer Moscow as the new mediator and shield for Arab oil infrastructure.
It is a phenomenal compression of history into less than a week. The tectonic plates of the Middle East are shifting in real time.
But the value of diving into a source like this is that you, the learner, are now armed with the multifaceted context you need. When you look at those breaking news alerts on your phone tomorrow, you aren't just seeing the explosions in the raw data.
You understand the high-stakes diplomatic narratives playing out at the United Nations. You understand the strategic phone calls happening between global leaders.
You understand the complex arguments about provocation, foreign interests, and the devastating ripple effects on both the global economy and human lives.
You have the full scope of the board, but I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to ponder on your own as you continue to watch this crisis unfold. Look past the immediate horizon of the military strikes. Think about the long game Russia is playing. If Moscow successfully positions itself as the primary diplomatic shield for Gulf oil infrastructure, while simultaneously working through the United Nations to stall U.S. and Israeli operations, how might this permanently rewrite the rules of global alliances? Long after the dust of Operation Epic Fury eventually settles, could this 6-day window be the exact moment that shifts the balance of power, influence, and trust in the Middle East for generations to come?
That is exactly the kind of question that makes paying attention to the nuance so incredibly important. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the KULT analysis. We hope this helped cut through the noise and give you a firmer place to stand. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the context behind the kinetic actions, and keep your curiosity alive. We will catch you on the next deep dive.